Hello, and welcome to the Yankees Seasons Podcast, Episode 4, Finding the Rhythm. Last time we saw the start of spring training games bring some ups and downs as the Yankee players, young and old, worked to find their rhythm and form both on the mound and in the batter's box. Players like Andy Carey found consistency at the plate early, and Mickey Mantle had already racked up a couple home runs and some outstanding defensive plays. Starting pitching had recently began pitching past the 3-inning early limit, signaling the success of a ramp-up that all pitchers go through during spring training to build up the arm muscles endurance to withstand the longer outings that come with being a starter. Mickey McDermott not only saw success with the conditioning on the mound, but also earned himself a walk-off victory on a sacrifice fly. Winning 6 of their 8 early games showed that there were strong winds behind the Yankee sails if they could sustain it. Major League Baseball also announced that television would play a much bigger role in the 1956 season than it had in previous seasons. It was reported that $26.2 million would be spent by the sponsors between play-by-play and pre- and post-game analysis shows in total, and that $5.2 million of that would be split between the 13 teams that agreed to televise their games. The Milwaukee Braves, Pittsburgh Pirates, and Kansas City Athletics all declined broadcasting their games on television. In total, 860 games are set to be broadcast in the 1956 season, which is 45 more than the previous year, and it broke down which teams would have which amount of games televised. Not surprisingly, the Dodgers topped the list with the Yankees right behind them. All 77 home games would be televised for each the Dodgers and the Yankees, with 6 road games being broadcast for the Yankees and 25 road games being broadcast for the Dodgers. The Yankees' total of 83 televised games topped the American League by a significant margin, the next most televised being Baltimore with 61 total games. An interesting final note on the television broadcasting of the season, particularly as it relates to sponsorship markets. Advertising surveyors discovered that Los Angeles and San Francisco markets could be ripe for sponsorship deals and television rights, with Los Angeles showing the potential to take the highest price for a team's TV rights. I'm not using hindsight, but if any of you listeners are familiar with baseball history in the near future in terms of 1956, you might take interesting note of those surveyors' findings as it relates to a couple teams in the National League. But I digress. We left the team on March 17th, a month away from opening day, where a 9th-inning Mickey Mantle home run, his third of the spring, had lifted the Yankees into the lead and secured them the win. I also left last week by mentioning we would cover the catcher situation. That game, March 17th, saw Howard leave the game with a hand injury that was later revealed not as serious as initially feared. Howard would be expected to miss 2 or 3 weeks, but up to this point had split the first 8 games catcher's duties with Berra. Darryl Johnson, a 27-year-old who had spent 1955 at the Yankees' AAA team in Denver, was looking to make the most of his new opportunity in Howard's absence. While at Denver, Johnson bat .306 with 170 hits. He would relieve Yogi in the 6th inning in the Yankees' March 18th game against the Cincinnati Redlegs, famously renamed to avoid confusion with the Communist Party. 5,808 people would attend the game at Al Lopez Field, named after the legendary catcher Al Lopez, who at the time of his retirement in 1947 held the record for most games caught at 1,918. The record would stand for 40 years, until the father of a future Yankee manager would take that title in 1987. Bob Boone, while no longer holding the record for most games caught, does hold the record for being the only player to catch over 1,000 games both in the American and the National League. The Boones are just built different. Back to Al Lopez Field, though. The Yankees put youngster Mark Freeman on the mound in front of the record-setting crowd, and in 4 innings he had kept the Redlegs to just 2 hits. Bob Grimm took over in the 5th and gave up a home run to Smokey Burgess in the 6th. It was the first home run given up by a Yankee pitcher so far in the spring. He would give up another in the 8th. This time, it came off the bat of Ray Jablonski after Grimm gave up a single to Frank Robinson. Billy Martin had also hit a solo shot in the 1st inning off Redleg starter Johnny Klipstein. The Yankees would score again in the 7th inning after Bill Skowron hit a single and then scored on a double hit by Bob Martin. The 9th started with a double hit by Lou Schizas, where he scored after Bill Skowron hit a single, his 3rd of the night. Bob Martin worked a walk, and he and Skowron advanced on a double steal. The double steal left first open, so Redleg pitcher Joe Black intentionally walked Phil Rizzuto to bring up the pitcher's spot in the lineup. Pinch hitting for Bob Grimm was Mickey McDermott, who had already had a walk-off sacrifice fly earlier in the week. This time, he grounded into a force out that allowed Skowron to score the 2nd run of the inning. The 4-3 lead would be enough, and Jim Constanti came in to pick up the save. Bob Grimm, the 20-game winning Rookie of the Year in 1954, was trying to find his way back to that form after a less than impressive sophomore season. In this spring, he has had his fair share of early struggles. Despite his recent clutch at-bats, Mickey McDermott was also having some ups and downs while on the mound. Stengel had mentioned to reporters that Grimm had potential to earn a spot in the regular rotation if he showed flashes of that 54 form. Because that form wasn't apparent, he would need to work out some kinks mechanically before that shift could be possible. But with McDermott also struggling to find his command, a switch might play out for Stengel. That being said, on the whole, the pitching staff has looked so dominant for the Yankees, taking 9 games to give up their first home run when Mantle himself alone has had 3 already. The Yankees would continue their thrashing of the Grapefruit League when taking on the Braves the next day, charging them for 18 hits in their 11-1 win. Don Larson would take the mound for the Yankees and pitch 5 massive scoreless innings, taking him to an 8 scoreless inning streak between his last 2 appearances. In those 5 innings of work, Larson had only given up 1 run. The conversation around camp is that Larson took the offseason mentally but also physically preparing, and he was coming back a different man than the bumbling Midwesterner from Indiana. On the Yankee hitting side, it was their star center fielder that would go 3 for 4, taking his spring batting average up to .480 with 12 hits and 25 plate appearances. Half of the Yankees' 18 hits came from 6 doubles and 3 homers off the bats of Norm Seaburn, Joe Collins, and Bill Skowron. Skowron has shown he is locked in and ready to be an everyday first baseman, hitting a triple shy of a cycle. With their rout of the Braves, the Yankees won their 5th game in a row, taking them to a record of 8-2 in their first 10 spring games. Hank Bauer also had an X-ray scheduled on his big toe after Billy Martin accidentally stepped on it. How'd he make this up? The next game, Mantle would keep the best spring of his career rolling with his 4th home run, a 450-foot bomb that despite its distance would not be enough to defeat the Redlegs, who had snapped the Yankees' 5-game winning streak with a 3-2 defeat. Yankee pitcher Johnny Cucks would take the loss and commit 2 errors that led to the Reds' runs. 5 hits were all that the Yankee hitters could come up with. Papers ran a profile of Bill Moose Skowron that outlined his rise through the Yankee farm system, and even compared him to the Iron Horse, Yankee legend Lou Gehrig, arguably the best first baseman of all time. Skowron, despite being 5'11 and 195 pounds, maybe not the biggest proportions by today's standards, but he had played football at Purdue, but left college early and signed for the Yankees in 1951 and found immediate success in the minors. Across 2 levels of B and then single-A baseball, he bat .321 with 20 homers and 89 RBI. He even had 10 of his 121 hits be triples, showing some speed, if not heads-up base running. In '52, the Yankees promoted Skowron to Triple-A, and the 21-year-old soared. His batting average rocketed to .341, and his home run count adding another 11 to his previous year's numbers, to 31 total home runs in 1952. He racked up 191 hits and 134 RBI. His average slipped slightly in 1953, where he stayed at the AAA team in Kansas City, but when he was called up to the big leagues in 1954, he showed the Yankees could trust him, batting .340 again with 73 hits in just 87 games. In 1955, he pulled a thigh muscle that sidelined him for 5 weeks, but other than that, looked good. Before the 3-2 defeat to the Redlegs, Skowron was batting .470 in the past week. His injury was behind him, and he was ready to add his name to the list of famous Bronx Bombers. On March 21st, we will focus on the Yankees spring training game against the Kansas City Athletics, but most of America was focused on the 28th Academy Awards, where Marty would take the awards for Best Picture, Director for Delbert Mann, and Actor for Ernest Borgnine. While Marty would be what Borgnine's Academy Award was for, I and most of my generation might recognize him as the voice of Mermaid Man and SpongeBob. As I mentioned earlier, though, we will mainly be focusing on the Yankees' handling of the Athletics, where they beat them 9-5. 3 home runs would be hit, 1 each by Gil McDougall, Jerry Coleman, and wait for the suspense. Is anyone surprised? Mickey Mantle, who reporters measured his blast at least going 475 feet. It would be Mantle's 5th home run of the spring. He would also hit a triple and take his spring average to .484. Andy Carey had also been sidelined the last 4 games to Tom Carroll at third base, but Carey would get the start against the Athletics. Mickey McDermott would pitch and look good before handling the ball to Tom Sturdivant in the 6th. There was some bad news for Stengel, though. His outfielders had been hit by an injury jinx that surprisingly had avoided Mickey Mantle. Hank Bauer's toe developed into an infection. Elston Howard had a confirmed broken finger. Irv Noren had some knee issues pop up and became slow healing. Then, before the game against the Athletics, Bob Cerv pulled a groin muscle and was scratched from the lineup. McDougald had just come back from a stint on the IL and found some success, but Stengel had a banged-up outfield. Because of this, younger players like Norm Seaburn, Lou Schizas, and Bob Martin have gotten regular looks in the outfield, all of them finding success both on offense and defense. Another issue not necessarily for Stengel, but for baseball in general, and I've debated not even bringing this into things because it's mainly centered around the Brooklyn Dodgers pitcher Johnny Padres, but it's starting to impact just about every team and every individual, and it starts when Johnny Padres was drafted by the United States Army, having his papers officially processed on March 5th. Why is this such a big deal? Plenty of players have been drafted. In our breakdown of the team, you might recall that a majority of the players on the Yankees roster served in either World War II Korea or both. Padres becomes a big deal for the details behind the draft. Let's recap the 1955 World Series, shall we? Who won the series? That's right, the Dodgers, their first time. And who was the World Series MVP? Come on now, we covered this. That's right, Johnny Padres was. Conveniently, after that World Series win, Padres was notified that on the draft board, he had been reclassified and his new draft classification was 1A. For those unfamiliar with the draft, or at least the draft in 1956, that meant that Padres was now subject to immediate military call, which he got when his papers were officially processed on March 5th. This didn't look good for the Dodgers, who just lost their main lefty in the starting rotation, a gap that would be filled, if only temporarily, by a young 20-year-old lefty named Sandy Koufax, who had 12 games under his belt in 1955, where he had a 3.02 ERA, but pitched 2 complete game shutouts. Padres draft didn't sit well with a lot of people, who wanted to know what spurred the reclassification. It turned into a pretty polarizing issue. Ted Williams didn't spare words. He talked to reporters and turned on politicians, the writers, kind of everyone. He claims if Padres had lost the World Series games instead of winning them, he'd probably be with the Brooklyn club all season. Why didn't they draft Padres a couple years ago when he was a nobody? Just because he becomes a star, that is no reason to draft him. He continues. A politician sees a husky young man pitching and he says to some 2-bit draft board, why isn't he in the service? The draft board has to go along with them. They leave Padres alone until he gets famous. They've taken 20% of his baseball earning life from him for no other reason than he got famous by beating the Yankees. Williams then turned his sights onto the writers. Why don't some of you gutless sports writers do something about it? College students get passing grades and they get deferred for 4 years. Guys who work for corporations too. What a lot of malarkey. Nobody is indispensable. The owners should go to the government and have the draft law changed. There's no reason why, with no war, ball players should serve their time in the offseason. Sorry for the longer quote, but go off, Ted. Billy Martin even had to distance himself from initial reports that stated he had backed Ted's quote. Red Sox general manager Joe Cronin was asked his response to Williams' remarks, to which he said, "This is America. Everyone is entitled to his own opinion." Which almost sounds like it could have been published yesterday, to be honest. And manager Mike Higgins added, he served 2 tours himself. He's entitled to say what he wants. Padres himself was supposedly reported at a party, responding to all of it, joking it off, saying, guess I pitched my way into the Army. Do you think they'll miss my 9 wins? On Thursday, March 22nd, the Yankees would square off against the Cardinals again. Bob Turley would take the mound, and having struggles already early in the spring, things seemed to pile on, giving up 4 runs in 6 innings. 3 of those runs would come off 6 hits in the first inning alone. For the Cardinals, Stan Musial, Red Schoendienst, yes, I had to look up the pronunciation because wow, Wally Moon, and Bob Rand all hit home runs. Rand's home run was an inside-the-park home run that was the result of Norm Seaburn attempting to make a play, but crashing into a concrete left center wall, leaving him bruised with a cut-up knee. He had been stepping into a more regular role in the team, but is expected to be out for the next couple of days. Mickey Mantle had a 6-game hitting streak going into the game, but had it snap when he went 0-5. He ended his streak, and we will be ending this episode. The Yankees had a pretty good stretch of games there. Not necessarily just because they won. It's spring, I can't emphasize enough how little these games matter from a win-loss standpoint, but the hitters looked aggressive behind the plate. Not just Mickey Mantle, but also folks like Bill Skowron. Don Larson had shown he took the offseason seriously and had strung together a few dominant starts in a row. Next time we continue our march through spring training laughing at the thought that this was all going to be in 1 or 2 episodes. But until then, thanks for listening and see you next time.